housing and real estate investing. Guys, today I first saw Mr. Austin Richardson on a LinkedIn post about how he helped put together a deal that almost seemed really difficult to put together. And I thought, man, I got to get this guy on a podcast because I know he's probably done so many other different deals before. And when I talked to him on the phone, I was like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. So welcome, Mr. Austin Richardson. He is the VP of Development at DW Development Group. Austin, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
Man, I am fantastic, dude. I've been looking forward to this one all week. And when I first talked to you and I heard you say the term put together deals, I was like, all right, I know what this guy knows what he's talking about. But also putting together the deal, that's a term that a lot of people, frankly, they don't even know what that means. But before we get through that, man, Austin, tell us a little bit about your background, man. How did you get into this world of affordable housing development in the first place?
Absolutely. So, going back to the day when I was a kid, I was in construction, digging trenches, ditches for contractors. Eventually moved my way up in construction to superintendent, project manager, ended up owning the company in construction. During that time, I got introduced to development. So I had an investor come in, wanted me to work with him and build some apartments. And so that got me first into development. Now, during this entire time, I was also in the Army as a medic in the National Guard. So I did that for about 12 years. And when I got out, I wanted to kind of continue a mission, doing something, helping people. Obviously, I was in construction and development, and I got introduced to affordable housing. Um, so I decided to dive in. Well, in my first job in affordable housing, I figured, man, I've been in construction. I could build anything. I could physically do it myself. Know how to do development. That's easy. And then started looking at terminology and affordable housing and the processes. And I tell you what, that was a pretty big learning curve, pretty quick to learn that process. I mean, who would have thought say a $12 million development would be $20 million now?
Man, it's crazy. And man, you got such a good story. I love that you used to be a medic, man. I used to be an EMT for 5 years as basic in the Northeast. And I can tell you
Nice.
just have this heart for helping people. Like working 12 years as a medic, I mean, that's a feat in of itself to last that long in a profession. Honestly, I met plenty of people and sometimes burnout rate is really high. And I still remember when I was at EMT, I was like, hey, I'm making like 12 bucks an hour. And who's the people taking care of the people that are helping the people?
Yeah,
And it just seems almost impossible when you see your colleagues that are answering 911 calls every single day, but they can't afford to live in the same city that they're servicing the community that they live in. And
absolutely.
it's so tough, man. So let me peel that back a little bit. So obviously, you have a construction background. You went from a superintendent to project manager development. Help people understand because there's some people that don't even understand what a developer is, to be honest with you, Austin. They just think like, oh, the developer is the builder, right? It's the same thing, right? And
Yeah.
that could not be further from the truth. So how would you explain what being a developer means to like your own kids?
You know, a developer is somebody who works in the background, I would say, is the person that puts the puzzle together. And in development, there's many pieces to the puzzle. Being the contractor who builds it, who physically builds it, is just one piece of it. You have multiple other pieces from obviously land acquisition, the finances, the lending, the investment, and so a developer is somebody who's going to find all those pieces and make sure they fit together. And then once they fit together as a whole, now the project starts. Right? Sorry, Ken, I can't hear you.
Whoops, sorry, I hit mute on my
Oh,
button by accident.
there we
All
go.
right. So when you first got into development and you had the investor come in and ask you to help him put developments, I mean, how did you learn in the first place? Like, what was sort of your sequence of events for learning? Because this is so interesting. Because sometimes people with a construction background, they might say, okay, well, how do I build a relationship with the city? Or how do I get this project financed? So, can you shed a little bit of light on how you learned about development?
Sure. I think in that process with being a contractor, obviously I knew how to build it. I knew how to ask certain questions to the city because we would do permits. We would work with inspectors, and with this first investor, I had a lot of questions. I'm a person who asks a lot of questions, and
Yes.
if anyone who knows me or has met me before, I will ask questions. And one thing I always tell people is there's no such thing as a stupid question. You'll realize over your lifetime that 80% of the questions you ask people that to professionals that you would think would know the answer don't know the answer. And
Yes.
the really good ones and the great leaders will go, you know what? I'm not sure, but let me ask my team and get back to you. So that's why I always say, there's no stupid questions. So I asked a lot of questions. So I asked them, okay, I could build this thing, but why this piece of property? Um, how do you put the numbers together? Because obviously I'm charging you X, and how do you get to this number to sell it? So I think through those questions, I learned the process. Eventually, he kind of guided me to how to do market research. That's something I didn't do. I was a contractor. I was looking for people to build for, and eventually showing me how to look for the piece of property and why. It's not so much the area is growing, let's just put an apartment complex here, but why an apartment complex and why certain rents, why certain size units. And that's something I never knew. So, over time working with them, just kind of learn that market research from them.
Ooh, okay, this is so good. So I love that you dove right into the market, understanding why that piece of dirt. Because you this is so good. Because I can't tell you how many times people have told me, like, oh, this area is blowing up. This place is hot. Like, you've got to
Yeah.
build here. And it's all emotional. So how did you separate that emotional factor of deciding where to build and where to develop versus actually using hard facts or figures to support the thesis for that development? So, ask another way, I get one of the main reasons I create this podcast, Austin, so that I hope that my kids listen to this podcast one day. And if they so choose to make an impact with housing as their primary method of helping people, then they would have this podcast. And so many times people don't understand how to explain things clearly in a way that even like a fifth grader can understand. So I'm
Yeah.
really curious to hear from you, like, hey, what were the questions that you asked? Like, why this piece of dirt? And how would you explain that to your own kids?
I would say the biggest thing is, and this can kind of generalize in life itself, is research and asking questions. And what that means is you could find an article, you could find a newspaper that says, hey, Nashville's growing, we need housing. Now, you could just go there and start building because they need it, right? But you got to ask the questions of where and why and for who. And so with that, obviously, as a developer, you're going to do a market study. So you're going to get that information. But even still, with market studies, yes, they ask a lot of questions to different apartment complexes, cities, counties, and a lot of times they get great answers. Sometimes they don't. So market studies aren't going to be the full answer. So now you need to go to where you want to develop and go sit down and talk with the city, sit down, talk with the county, maybe even sit down with some big kind of corporations out there and ask them the question: what do you need, what do you see, and what do you have in the future? And now take all of that together and kind of create your um, where and why.
Okay. I love that you don't just depend on the market study because I mean, for people that don't know what a market study is, right? I want to make sure that I understand. Hey, no matter what, when you are working on development, you have to get a market study because a lender wants a independent or third party opinion aside from the
Yep.
developer who might be biased about the piece of learning to say, hey, we think that you, based on your thesis of building 100, 200, 300 units, you can achieve X amount of rent and it will lease out by this amount of period and that's the absorption rate, blah 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 blah.
Yep.
And those assumptions are going to be a little bit different than what you might have originally put into your underwriting and your pro forma, because now there is a third party that is providing some actual figures. And if you, for some reason, want to go against that market study, you better have some very strong supporting information, which is what Austin is saying right now. You got to go out there and ask them more questions and understand the market to show the lender, especially when you're trying to look for financing and funding for to build the project, that you know what you're talking about. So I really love that you don't just settle for the market study. You go out there and look at neighborhoods to figure out what else do they want.
Yeah. And now, granted, in the market study, we all know we can provide them information too, because they only can find as much as they can. They only can ask so many people and so many questions. So we can, as developers, provide them with something. Hey, this is happening, or this is being built, or this is coming, and they can take that information, research it, and they can or maybe not put it into the market study. However, once you have a market study done, let's say you're talking to the city, and I've had this happen multiple times of, oh, we have a tech company moving in, and they just bought this piece of land, and they're going to build, 1 million square feet of whatever there, and they're going to need 600 employees. Well, the market study didn't say that. Well, of course it didn't, because it didn't have that information. So that's why, again,
Ah,
you have to do your own research. You have to have those talks with everybody in the community, and you have to, um, ask the right questions.
yeah, and this is good. So help us understand what are the types of questions that you might ask, let's say the city, right? Or the county, whoever's in charge of approving your project as a developer. What would you suggest the types of questions that if your kids were trying to become developers, like what are the types of questions that they should be asking their city so that they can one understand whether there's appetite for development, but two really get to the core of building what the community needs based on the city planners, the city councilmen, et cetera.
I would say get the conversation going to where the person you're talking to is taking control of that conversation, who wants to put the input. So the way I approach it is I go there, obviously I introduce who I am, what I'm trying to do. Maybe I found a piece of property, and this is what I'm thinking because of the market study. But then I put it on their plate. What do you think about that? What do you think your needs are? What are you wanting? Um, what is your community telling you that they want? What's coming in the future? And kind of, you know, probing questions to get them to talk. And once you start that, you'll you wouldn't believe how much information they provide you. As far as, oh, we got this company coming here, we got more employees coming. Actually, we own a piece of property, or I know somebody that owns this property. I think that it'd be better to go there, and we can help you out with it. So it's allowing them to take control of that conversation.
What a great guiding principle. Because when you really kind of set aside the ego there as a developer, so many times people have told me they go to neighborhood meetings and this developer comes in and says like, we got this big project for you, you're gonna love this project. And the developer is so emotionally tied to the concept that they came up with that they think, oh, the city's gonna love this no matter what, like this is such a great idea. And they never took the time to listen. They
Yeah.
never took the time to listen about what the community wants. And
Yep.
I'm so glad you put in that principle. And to be honest with you, that's such a good one. Oh, I can't believe how important this is. And I can't believe how many people miss the mark on this. It's learning to listen. It sounds so basic. It's things that we learn as a kid sometimes, but we forget when it comes to development for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that. public-private partnership. That's what's going to get you in, today's time. Maybe 6 years ago and further back, it was much easier to go in and here's what we're doing. And you didn't really have to ask for much because it was cheaper to build, land was cheaper. But now that everything is expensive, I mean, you have to ask, right? In affordable housing, we can't just get our credits, 9% or 4% credits and say, okay, we're going to build this thing. There's no way. Your capital stack is 10 deep now. You're going to need money from the city, waivers and grants and, all this stuff needs to go into affordable housing. So the the old school mentality of going in and saying, "Hey, we're going to build this. The market study says you need it. This is going to be a beautiful building, and you're welcome," is not the way to approach it. The
Oh,
you need to work with them. Now, look, I've gone to them many times with an idea. Hey, I think this land would be great. Here's what I'm thinking about putting there. According to my market study, this is what you need. But now let me ask you, what do you think about that project? Do you think we need bigger units? Do you think we need more or less? Should we do senior instead of the family? What are your ideas? And
yes.
I want them to contribute to it. So at the end of the day, I want them excited about the project. I want them to believe they're a part of the project because that relationship is going to have to last a long time. And I think that's what a lot of people miss is at least in affordable housing, right? You're going to build something, you're probably going to own it for a while. It's going to have a lure on it. You're at least going to be there 30 years or 50 years of affordable. So the last thing you want to do is piss them off. But what you want is a great relationship to start because what happens 3 years from now, and maybe you have a hard time getting tenants, or you have tenants that are bad and you need the police there. If you have a great relationship, it's a really easy phone call or email to the mayor or the police chief and say, "Hey, sorry, but we're having these problems. Can you help at all?" They're going to be willing to help because you had that communication, you had that partnership from the beginning.
Yeah, it's not a set it and forget it type of relationship where you just build it, you plop it there, and you say, "Okay, let it perform."
Yeah,
And people have such a weird conception of what development is. And so, Austin, you just kind of hit on so many items, right? From public-private partnerships to 9% credits. Let's kind of break that down for the audience, right? Public-private partnership. That's a term that's kind of gets thrown around a lot, but not a lot of people understand all the different levers that you can pull in order to make a deal pencil, right? Make a deal financially feasible to provide affordable housing.
mhm.
So, can you share some examples or levers that people can pull to create a project that's financially feasible for a public-private partnership in terms of affordable housing?
Sure. I think you know one thing that can help is land trust, community land trust. Now, there's certain land trust places you go to do it. There's nonprofits that can help you with it. That maybe they own the land, they lease it, but you could get that from the city as well. So, or the county. So, you saw the article about one, and it was the county that had a land trust. And so, essentially, what happens is that land trust can purchase the land and they lease it back to you. What that does is it allows you to mitigate property taxes, especially if it's a government entity. In certain states, a nonprofit that will take the property taxes away. So not only are you not having to purchase the upfront cost of the land, but now you're not having to pay property taxes or they're severely reduced. That's a big thing in a performa. So just the land and property taxes is a huge, hurdle to overcome. So with a land trust, that can help. And what the land trust does is instead of say paying $3 million for the property, they're going to pay the 3 million, and they're going to give you a 99-year lease for X amount per year. Uh, so that's that land trust is one thing.
Okay, let's go one step deeper on the land trust. So, a communal land trust typically is a nonprofit organization. They would buy the property as a nonprofit, and because of their nonprofit status, they don't have to pay as much, if any, property taxes back to the city.
Correct.
And I want to make sure people understand if you're looking at a pro forma, you have your revenue for your rents, then you have all your expense items. Property taxes typically is probably sometimes one of your biggest expense items on that pro forma. And
Yeah.
that would drive your net cash flow. That would drive the valuation of your property. So being able to take that property tax expense out of the pro forma, it's huge,
Oh yeah.
huge effect on your pro forma and the valuation of your property. But interestingly enough, what Austin's talking about is a 99-year ground lease back. So it's almost like, hey, the community land trust, they own the property. They lease it back to you for maybe a flat fee, but as a return, you pay that ground lease expense, but you don't pay what would have been a much higher expense on a property tax expense line. What did I miss anything there, Austin? Did I say that back to you correctly?
No, yeah, you're correct.
And how do you build these relationships with these communal land trusts? Like, are these typically city organizations? What's your experience on how to build relationships with the communal land trust?
Well, obviously working with them in the past, so I know quite a few just over the years. One thing about any type of business is the more experience you have, the more network you gain. Um, However, again, I go back to my original conversation with the city and or county to where I'm trying to go, and I allow them to use their relationships to introduce me to them, right? So it's all about getting that first connection with them, getting them excited about the project because once they are, they're now wanting to help. And then that's the best position to be in because you might go to them and say, "Hey, I can't make this work because I'm $1 million off," right? And they might reply back, "Well, hey, we got this land trust. What if I introduce you to them, they could buy the land and lease it back. That might save you $1 million." And so you have those conversations. And again, the biggest thing is the conversation, the asking the questions, and allowing them to help you with the project.
Oh my goodness. Austin, dude, your kids better watch this one day because they're gonna learn so much from you, man. Because sometimes being a developer is being able to see and being aware of other tools in your tool belt that you might not have even knew that was available out there. And this is a perfect example of working with a community land trust for achieving that same mission of creating more affordable housing. Okay, this is so good. All right, so we just covered community land trust. What other sort of public-private partnership levers do you know about that you would be able to kind of share with the audience today so that they know exactly, hey, if I'm trying to build affordable housing, where else can I look for different levers to pull to make a deal work?
Sure. So obviously you have other funding sources. So you have CDBG funds, you have home funds, your HTF funds, but individual cities sometimes put together their own funding pools. So I've been to cities or towns that, you know, call it what you want, but they have, an affordable housing fund. Whatever they name it, it could be a different name, but they might take tax revenue from Airbnbs or just sales tax revenue from selling marijuana or whatever the case is, and they might take a certain percentage of that and put it into a fund. And so that could be a fund that you could use, whether it's they just give you money that as long as it keeps affordable, you don't have to pay it back. It could be a loan, maybe a 0% interest loan for X amount of years that you do pay it back,
Mm,
but you don't have to pay interest. So I think there's a lot of different options. And I think as a developer, once you get in that conversation and they bring that up and say, hey, well, we have a $2 million fund, we could help you with the project, is to also help them use that money wisely. Right? Again, you want this
yes.
relationship to work for a long time. you might want to come back and develop more. So let's say they had $2 million. Well, if you just take that $2 million, that helps your project. That's great, but now they're having to refill that budget line. So the next
Yes.
projects might take a while. So I think as a good developer, you need to help them better use that funds. So maybe that's a payback. Well, hey, I'm going to pay you back 10 grand a year. Or maybe it's, we have 2 million. Can we do a loan where I do small, payments to you to pay it back over 20 years? So I think it's, we got to work on both sides of this as the developer to help the city to help us. And so with that, we need to find unique ways to help them without just taking the money and building it.
Man, this is so good because now you're helping other developers, other aspiring developers
Yeah.
understand that there are other mechanisms to finance a project that they might not have known about, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we hear about CDBG funds, block grants, home funds all the time, and even though there's risk of those funds being cut, you are now also directing them to say, hey, maybe there's an affordable housing trust fund for that city or that county that you can tap into.
Yeah.
And the guiding principle through line through all of this is what I really took away is sometimes you might think a deal won't pencil for some reason, but chances are you might not have just asked enough questions yet. Because if you
Yeah.
keep asking questions, and I don't want to dismiss this, Austin has built up that past relationship of delivering on projects, constantly looking out for the city or the county that he's working with based on his past construction experience. Like everything has stacked to this point that Austin can ask the right questions, but also people believe him. Like that's really, really important. I don't think I want people to dismiss the fact that you have been doing this for many, many years, man. And that's the only reason why you are asking these questions now, because you first know what questions to ask, but two, you have a sincere intention of helping people specifically. And so we just talked a lot about soft subsidies. We talked about the communal land trust. How about LIHTC, right? Low income housing tax credits, Austin. I know you primarily have worked on those deals. Maybe let's start really high level first about what are low income housing tax credits? Can you explain that simply for the audience?
Sure. So it is a a tax credit investors can use. And the federal government allocates X amount of dollars per person. Obviously, each state has a population. So they take that dollar value times the population, gives you let's just say $10 million for a state. Say a state gets $10 million in tax credits for that year. They can now turn around and create an application, a very competitive application, and put their wants and their requests and their requirements in there. And us developers go in there and kind of compete for these credits. Hey, I got the best development. I get all these points, or you should award me blah, 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 whatever it is. And so then those credits are allocated to these developments. So say each developer got $1 million in tax credits. Now us as a developer will work with typically a syndicator, a middleman who finds the investor. Now some have, the relationship with the direct investor that's going to purchase them. But either way, an investor will want those tax credits. And again, just to make numbers easy, say it's $1 million tax credits used for that project. That's $1 million they could use every year for 10 years. So that, a million times 10 is $10 million is the amount of tax credits the investor gets. And what that means is if you have an investor that obviously has a very large business and their taxes they have to pay the federal government is millions of dollars each year, they can now take 1 million of it and cancel 1 million away from what they owe the federal government. So it's a value to them because it's less money they have to pay the federal government, but on the same term, they get to use that, right? First of all, that's great PR for a company that we help with affordable housing. So even if it was a wash, it's great PR. But they also purchase those tax credits at a certain cent value. So if it's $10 million that they get over the 10 years, um, they purchase that at a cent value. Could be 90 cents, could be 80 cents, or it could be in the 70s like it is right now. So essentially, as the developer, I might have given them $10 million in tax credits, but my project only gets $8 million of equity from the investor.
This is so good. And I love kind of talking out loud to myself whenever I hear this explanation because essentially that tax credit investor, their buyer, they're still an investor in your project. They're still an equity investor. So
Yeah,
that's why it still matters. Just because you have these tax credits doesn't mean that they're going to automatically buy from you. They want to make sure that Austin knows what he's doing. He has the wherewithal and the financial support to build the project because otherwise they might lose all the money, to be honest with you.
yeah,
But upfront, if they get $10 million of tax credits over 10 years and they pay $8 million today so that Austin can take that $8 million to go build that project, I mean, technically, it's almost a discount on that investment because they paid $8 million for $10 million tax credits. But
yeah.
that's an advantage for Austin because that now he can take that $8 million today and go build that project. Did I miss anything in the explanation? Did I explain that back correctly? What did I
Yeah.
miss?
Yeah, and
Okay.
just to kind of, for some people to understand, you know, one of the reasons why the cent value is a little bit less is because they have to hold that for 10 years, right? So it is a 10-year investment for them. Who knows
Mm.
what their company is going to do in 10 years? Uh, so there's a timing issue there. You could go into state tax credits, accelerated state tax credits, which they can, use 75% of it within the first year because they could
Oh.
use it so quick. The cent value is going to be higher.
And that's so good. So help us understand. Sometimes people there are 9% tax credits, there are 4% tax credits. What's the difference between them and how much equity do they provide towards a capital stack for a developer typically?
Well, so obviously there's a formula that calculates, the amount of basis on a project. A 9%'s gonna be more, right? 9%'s more than 4%. Um, I don't want to get into the whole calculation because that might take some time, but so 9% is going to give you at the end more funds, more equity, say from the investor, because you have a higher percentage. Now, 4% is going to give you less for the same project. So if you had the same project, 9% deal is going to give you more equity than a 4% deal. But now a 4% deal, you're using bonds in there. So it's kind of a different type of project. Now, typically in the past, it was 9% was competitive and 4% was not. Meaning, if you put together a deal and had a capital stack where you had enough other funds to make the project feasible, you could go to the state and say, "Hey, here's my deal," and you could get it approved pretty quick. Um, Obviously, since COVID, that changed. So a lot of states are oversubscribed. So it's now competitive for a 4% deal. Um, so it's a little different. I mean, you could go to some states like Montana and do a 4% deal, but it's being rural and cities not having $5 million to help you with it. Besides maybe Bozeman or Missoula or Billings, it's tough to make a deal work there because you don't have enough equity into the project.
Got it. And what just roughly speaking, how much equity do 9% credits typically provide in terms of the capital stack proportion for a development deal?
Um, that's a good
Would
question.
you would you say 60%, 70%? What do you think?
Probably towards 60%.
Yeah. How about 4%? 20%, 30%? What do you think?
Like you're probably
Roughly half of that?
30%.
Yeah. And that's kind of why when you brought up 4%, you mentioned bonds, right? And there are a certain amount. of debt that you have to use. And this is what's so interesting with the new legislation, because previously what the requirement was like 50% of your deal
Yep.
for a 4% tax credit deal has to be with bonds, but now it might be 25%. How are you thinking about that new legislative introduction of reducing from 50% to 25%? Like, what does that mean for a developer? Like, how are you approaching deals a little bit differently?
I think that the biggest thing it means is there's going to be more available 4% deals now, because now you're cutting the how much bonds you need in half for the for that state. So I think there's going to be more available. There's going to be more 4% deals available to do in each state because of it.
Got it. And what sort of deals are best for like a 4% deal? So the what I'm trying to get to now, Austin, with you is for people that want to bring you opportunities, right? You don't want them just throw over a piece of land and just like, hey, let me just go email Austin and he'll figure it out. Like, what kind of principles do you have for like, hey, what might make a 4% deal work? Like, what is considered even a deal, right? Because sometimes that's like the biggest, most nebulous question. Oh, is this a deal or is it not a deal? So tell us a little bit more about what's a good candidate for a 4% deal, and what do you consider to be quote unquote a deal, and what you're looking for.
So, my how I view it, and other developers have their own ways of doing deals. But for me, on a 4% deal, I look at it one of two ways. Either it's got to be a rehab. Um, the rehab has to be old and cheaper, um, but have quite a few units. Let's say at least 100 units. On a new construction side, it's got to have a lot of units, right? So you need to have a lot of units per that property to kind of reduce the cost of the land. Because again, on a 4% deal, you only get so much equity into it. So you either need to find super cheap land where you can put a lot of units, or you got to either put a lot of units for more expensive land. And kind of same with a rehab. I can't buy a rehab at market value. It's got to be something that really needs work, that's older, um, in order to kind of make it financially feasible. Obviously, it's got to be in an area that can provide funds, whether it's a city or a town. It's not something so easy of here's a piece of property, as you might know, and your you know our wants as a developer are different in each state because the QAP is different, right? So there's different things we need in different states. So it's a question that you can't really answer.
Yeah, but I love that you brought up the QAP, the Qualified Allocation Plan, because for the new people out there, what you can do today is go look at the QAP for your state. You
Yeah,
can read through essentially what the state is telling you, what they're prioritizing for their own initiatives. Because you might
yeah,
have a state that says, hey, I am prioritizing solving the homelessness problem. So they might say, hey, you might get X amount of bonus points if you have a housing that is dedicated towards a certain population. Maybe it's housing the homeless, maybe it's housing the veterans, maybe it's housing seniors. But that's something
yeah,
you can look at right now and figure out, okay, maybe if I have a piece of land that comes in this area that's suitable for X, and I have a nonprofit that can provide services for homeless folks. And now I'm starting to build a plan up step by step for thinking about how do I win these tax credits? Because if I can't get the funding for this project, then it's not negotiable. It's a non-starter, right? You got to figure out whether or not you can get the services. And sometimes just having a piece of dirt is not enough. You have to think about who else do you need to pull into the team. Do you have city buy-in? Do you have county buy-in? Do you have a nonprofit to support that deal? All that stuff stacks in your favor so that it gives you a higher probability to get the funding that you need for that piece of land. And that's
yeah.
based on all the questions that and all the points that Austin raised today. You have to figure out how to ask those right questions, because there are probably hidden pockets of funding that you never knew about if you didn't know the questions that Austin recommended you to ask today.
Yeah.
Man,
Yeah, and
this is.
brings up a good point about QAP because I have this conversation a lot. I just had one, probably two yesterday. Obviously, I get a lot of people that come to me with whether they're landowners and have land and say, "Hey, I need affordable housing. Like our city needs affordable housing. Can
Yes.
you buy our land?" Or I get real estate agents who say, "I want to find you, affordable piece of property for your project." And look, the first thing I tell all of them is look, go to this website and download the QAP and
Oh,
look
so
at your
good.
property
Yes.
and read through it and see how your property looks. And I give them advice, be like, "Hey, y- is your property in a QCT or a DDA? Do you have a city that has affordable housing?" I said, if you're trying to sell your property, I mean, maybe I'm interested, maybe I'm not. I'm probably not going to look at it, quite honestly, because I get a lot of people that send me properties all the time. But I said, you might be able to make more money on your property, honestly, if you could do your own research and figure out that QAP. And hey, if you're in a QCT and a DDA, and your city has funds, and you actually go talk to them, and maybe they could even say, "Hey, we're willing to put money on this project if it's affordable." I said, now you can put that into your MLS and say, affordable piece of property for affordable housing, and here's all the things you could get, and here's that's going to look very appetizing to the developer because you've done a lot of the work up front. Um, but essentially,
Ooh.
real estate
Well,
agents that want to get into it, go ahead.
well, Austin, I want to make sure we define the term of QCT and DDA, like the qualified census tract. Why is that important for someone to look up? Because that's a quick lookup, but why is it important, especially for a developer like you?
So that gives us a 30% basis boost, right? So what that does is, um, let me try to make this as easy as possible with qualify, your basis. Say if all of your project costs $20 million. Now, tax credits are based off of your basis. Now, your basis can't include certain things like land or, tax credit payments, interest. There's certain things that can't include, or maybe it's half of it that's included. But let's say your project's 20 million and your basis is six 17 million, right? So that's probably an average. So 17 million. Now, typically you're going to figure out your 9 and 4% off that 17. But if you have a basis boost, which would be a QCT or a DDA, you're going to take that 17 million and add 30% to it. So that's huge when it comes to the end of the day equity that goes into a project. Um, I would say today you have to have that basis boost to make it work.
And sometimes if you don't have that, if you're not in a QCT or DDA, sometimes you might not score enough points to even
Yeah,
win the tax credits in the first place, right?
that's
So
true too.
I
That's another point. You get points on a QAP. Um,
that's exactly
and to differentiate a 9 but a 4% deal, you have to have a QCT or DDA to get a basis boost. You don't have it, you
mhm.
don't get it. Now a 9%, obviously if you have it, you get it. But if you don't, you can, request it, and you have to tell a good story behind why you need it and possibly get approved for it. Um, but on 4%, you either have it or you don't. So that's kind of a big deal when you're looking at a piece of property, whether it's acquisition or new construction. You know, you got to have it in a QCT or DDA.
This is good. All right. So that's the first step that someone can do to do the lookups on their own. We talked
Yeah,
about going to your state's QAP, looking it up. You can figure out whether or not your land is in a qualified census tract or a difficult to develop area by looking it up. So before people bring you a deal, like just do this, people. If you want someone with Austin's experience, you gotta show that you can do a little bit of legwork, do a little bit of homework, show a little bit of initiative before you bog down his time. All right.
yeah.
Now the next step is, well, Austin, how do you determine the deal? So let's say someone brings you a deal, it's like, hey, I read the QAP. I think this thing has promise. This is in a QCT or this is in a DDA. What's sort of the next step that you take to evaluate whether or not that could be a deal or not?
For me, how I do it is I will take that deal and I'll put it into a pro forma that I have a template of. And so I'll obviously put that land cost in there, and I'm hoping they already know what the zoning is as far as how many units per acre, and hopefully with that information I can put it in my pro forma based on how many acres it is, and then I will look up what the rents are for that county. Excuse me.
And then
Um,
obviously you
and
do the
then just
underwriting.
a very quick populated thing, an average cost per unit to build, your average cost. Obviously, it's not exact, and it could be quite a bit of pennies off, but at least with that, I could populate. Okay, how much money do I need now? With that, I can typically, from experience, tell if I can make it work or not. Meaning, if I'm, say, in Nashville and I need $5 million to make it work, I'm probably going to look into it. $5 million isn't a lot for a big city like that, because there's probably funds from the city, from the county. There's probably community land trust I could deal with, and I think 5 million for that is pretty feasible to get. Now, if I'm in Butte, Montana, and it says I'm $5 million off, like I'm just gonna walk away from that because there's no way you're gonna get that much there, even with a land trust and with city funds. Just knowing the fact that they don't, they're not, you know, uh, have a lot of funds in a rural town like that.
Okay, let's dig a little deeper there. 'Cause also, this is good because this is the meat and potatoes right here. Because now let's take it down two ways. One is when you say, "Hey, I need X million dollars to make the deal work." What did you mean by that? Like, why do you need $5 million? For people that don't understand, like, are you looking into already understanding, like, hey, okay, I can win the 4% tax credits for this deal, but for some reason, I'm still $5 million short for the gap in my capital set? What did you mean by that for needing extra amount of money to make it work?
Because I have a gap, right? Because it's affordable housing, you only can charge so much, per unit, depending on the size, depending on the AMI. So it's not like a market rate deal. A typical market rate development for me in the past, if I was $1 million off, I'm going to see if I can't raise the rents, maybe add an amenity or two to raise rents to equal out the gap I have. Well, in affordable housing, you can't. You have, here's your AMIs, here's your rents, that's it. So that right there, between your rent, your utility allowance, and your operating expenses, you're going to know how much money you can get for a loan. So you obviously know what your mortgage is going to be. You know what your 4% or 9% equity is going to come in, and then now you have that gap between those total funds and how much the development's going to cost. Um,
Right,
so
because a lender is going to cap you like, hey, we don't. Right, there's the debt service coverage ratio, which
yeah,
essentially says that, hey, you have X amount of rent, that's going to cover X amount of the debt service based on your monthly mortgage payment. Just so for people that are in the single family world, and I'm just trying to draw analogous terms for them.
sure,
Well, your your debt is capped because you have to have X amount of rents that exceeds your debt service every month. So if your debt is capped at that amount, you might not have enough money to build that entire project, to build that apartment, what are you looking to do? So that gap is huge. So how do you close that gap? And that's what I think you were talking about earlier, Austin, where you said maybe the city can give you a 0% loan because that's what's required for you to build that project in the first place because a traditional lender, even if they have, especially in affordable housing, they might have a certain risk profile. They can't exceed a certain amount for your project in terms of allowing money to their debt service, because then that's not they're not being responsible for their own constituents that lent them money or had deposits with them, right? Their goal is
absolutely,
to not lose money in the
yeah.
first place. And also, I want to ask one more question because you talked earlier about you get the zoning, you figure out how many units there are. How often do you think about, well, what if I get this rezoned and I can get X amount of additional units, right? Because this is what I love hearing about people's perspectives. They might say, hey, I know that it's a QCT, I know that I might get some credits, blah blah blah. And I with the existing zoning, this is how many units I can get per acre. But sometimes they don't think about, well, what if I get bonus density because it's affordable, right? How do you think about that process? Like, how do you apply bonuses and whether or not you can distribute units based on what you know about the city?
That's a tough question. I would, you know, for me, I try not to go through rezonings. I try to avoid it. Right? It's so painful and it's so time consuming. Um, However, there are those properties that it's worth the time. Right? Maybe it's in a town that hasn't received an award that you know can just maximize the points. And essentially, you have a really good feeling it would be an award winning project if you did it. However, you would have to rezone it. Those ones are worth going after, in my opinion. Again, others can think differently because obviously it has to do with funding, right? For me to rezone a property, it's very hard, first of all, to find somebody that's going to hold it under contract to rezone something. I mean,
Oh
it's
yeah.
hard enough to have somebody hold it to just do a tax credit application. So you have to look at you're going to have to maybe you could hold it, but let's say you can't, you got to buy it. Now you need my time or my team's time to work with the city to rezone it. So it gets a little costly. So a lot of big developers do that and land hold and have something for the future. So it's kind of just kind of dependent on the developer and how much cash they have to do something like that. But as far as like a rezoning process, I think what you have to look at is the story. I think everything comes back to a story. Why is this property good for that community? And how can you get that community to be excited about it and help you? And so one thing that I'll help with is look, I've been to cities where they say, well, we can't rezone it, or it's going to take 3 years. I come with some experience and say, I have examples for you. You can give
Mm,
these people a call. They did resolutions or some type of code change or addendum, and depending on where you're from and how you look at it, there's multiple options. So I was like, here's some options. Here's their contact to those cities that did it. Maybe this can help you expedite the process, but I'll leave it in your hands if you want to. I'm not going to ever push anybody because if I'm pushing somebody, it's not a community that uh, is going to have a good relationship, right? I want them to want it. I can help provide the tools and the pathway to do it from doing it before, and I think that really helps um, with the rezoning process and getting the council on board of why is giving them examples of other cities that have done it or other towns.
wow. This is why I know what you're talking about. I mean, Austin, you've always erred on the side of putting aside your ego, making sure that other people feel like it's their idea, not you coming and say like, "Oh, I'm the guy that did this. I'm the guy that brought this project to the city."
Yeah,
You've always erred on the side of like, let the community decide what they want to prioritize, and let them want it. It's let them feel like it's their idea, their proposal, whether that's more green space, more density, more units for their own working class families.
yep,
And I think this is such a great guiding principle. Just again, there's been so many little nuggets here that I really hope people kind of rewind back and re-listen to this because this was such a masterclass on affordable housing development. And these are not the things that are typically talked about in textbooks, to be honest with you. This is just stuff that Austin has accumulated through trial and tribulation, like putting himself through the fire, probably getting yelled at a few times by a few folks to make all these projects work. And this is what's so cool about this conversation, Austin. I've learned a tremendous amount from you, man. And I'm so grateful that you came onto the podcast today. Man,
absolutely.
without people
I
like you,
appreciate it.
I would have never had the home I grew up in, Austin. And I'm so grateful for you being so open and sharing. And man, Austin, when I started this podcast like 3 years ago, I people have said, Kent, you're why are you doing this? Like you're never gonna solve this problem. like it's impossible. And I always beg to differ. I always thought, hey, it's only a matter of time before we collect enough pieces to the puzzle. And Austin, you're such a big piece of the puzzle because not only are you doing the thing, but you are here sharing the information that might have felt like a black box for someone that maybe has a piece of land right now that they want to do something good with it, but they had no idea how to even start the process. So, Austin, this is a question I ask everybody on a podcast, and I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on it. Why do you think affordable housing, particularly the lack of affordable housing, has just been like so hard to solve for?
Um, it's a challenging topic, affordable housing, and from a developer side, it's fighting obviously good economies with high land costs, with less people working in construction field causes a higher construction cost per unit. Um, so we're fighting these changes that happen. And I think, unfortunately, on affordable housing, we need to start looking at it more community centric, meaning we got to get more options within the community itself to build affordable housing. We cannot rely on a tax credit or a federal credit to do these. I think we're going to be
Yes.
better off as a community to organize and develop something. Not saying tax credits are going away or we can't use them, but I think, obviously with federal funds being lessened, that we need to look to be more community centric. And so that's everybody being involved in a project, from the city to a nonprofit to even corporations that have their workforce there that needs it. So I think what you're going to see is more larger capital stacks. I think it's really the answer. It's no longer just a developer and maybe some city funds. It's going to have to be everybody involved in it to really solve affordable housing. Now we could go into policies and requirements, which that's a totally different topic that is a sore topic to some that I talk about, but I think that's another avenue.
Man, what great insights there, Austin. But I loved your point of community, and I truly resonate with that because I think if you can understand how to guide your community to look within your current inventory of just available land, even you could start there. Maybe every city has parking lots. Every city has every city has parking lots. Every city has some land in its own inventory that you can potentially turn into affordable housing.
Yeah, that
Look
that
there
that, that,
first
br-
and to
that
get
brings
insight from Austin.
that brings up one point, and people will tell you this about me is that I'm an out of the box thinker. If you give me a piece of property, I'm going to tell you something that could be developed there. Every piece of property can be developed. Just think of how, why, and and you got to think out of the box, but you can make it work. And you brought up a great point, like old malls. You got
Yes.
all that parking lot. Like, could we put something there? Could we use the mall? Could we use that old office building? Like, think out of the box. Quit looking at apartments or land, but let's think about areas that just don't work anymore, right? The malls, the office buildings, old church. Like, how can we adapt and reuse things?
Yeah, and I love these perspectives because now you can see again, the whole point of today's conversation was I want people to see opportunities that you might not have recognized were opportunities in the first place, right? That old mall or that parking lot next to the old mall that's probably graded already and
Yep.
it's ready to go. Maybe with your utilities nearby that can make the financial feasibility work at the end of the day because you're not trenching 3 miles for water. Like these
Yep.
are the things that stack in your favor that you can understand. Hey, maybe if I can be the thought partner and not be a greedy developer, right? There's differences when you go to a city and say, hey, look, I really care about affordable housing. I think this is where you guys can look into your existing inventory of assets. That can be turned into X and X amount of units for seniors. That can be turned into X and X amount of units for working class families.
Yeah.
People would appreciate you giving that guidance without you having to say, like, hey, I would do X if you do Y for me. Stop
Yep.
doing this quid pro quo type of arrangement. And people would appreciate that. People would trust you more. I mean, sometimes it's just learning about how to build trust in the first place. But your trust is built probably out of your genuine intention to help that community. And I can
Absolutely.
tell Austin is genuine about his intention because he came on today and he shared what so many developers might be saying. You know what? I'm going to keep this information to myself. I don't want to tell them because that might damage my business plan. I'm going to invite too many competitors. But Austin didn't do that. He came on and shared all this information with all of you. So please take it upon yourself to learn from what Austin has taught you today. Please, this is so important, man. Oh, Austin, this was such a good conversation, man. Can you tell I'm freaking fired up about this, man?
Absolutely. Well, I'm
Oh
willing to
man.
share any information I can. People could always reach out to me and ask me questions. For me, I'd rather provide as much as I can to people and community because look, at the end of the day, what you put out uh, comes back to you.
Yes. Yes. Dude, this is so good, man. Man, we gotta have you back on a podcast, Austin, where maybe we have you do like a walkthrough of a project that you've done and really guide people, maybe through like a case study, right? Where you say, hey, this is how the deal came to me. This is what I looked up right away. This is how I thought it was a deal or not. And then here's all the problems we face along the way. Because sometimes people just don't get started because they have this fear of like, how do I solve the problem when problems come up? Well, at least Austin can maybe shine a light on a problem that he has faced and share with you how he overcame that problem. Because look, at the end of the day, development is just solving problems. You're never going to have 100% of all the
Yeah,
answers. It's impossible. But if you have a great team with great resources and great attitudes like Austin, then now all of a sudden you can feel a little bit more confident that you can do this. So, Austin, for people that want to reach out to you or send opportunities to you, what are you looking for and how do they reach out to you?
Um, reach out to me on my LinkedIn. Um, message me on there. Obviously, I have my email and phone number on there. But as far as deals, anything that you find would be something the community wants, something that if
Mm,
you have a deal or property that you're very passionate about, not because you want to sell something, but you're passionate about this property because of X, Y, and Z. Those are the deals I want to look at.
I love that guiding principle. Man, Austin, this has been so fun, man. I make sure I will link to your LinkedIn in the show notes down below. And I can't wait to have you back on the podcast, man. This has been so fun, dude. Seriously.
Sounds great.
There's nothing I would have preferred to wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning for to have a conversation like this. I freaking love this stuff, man. I'm so glad you came on early with me, man. I'm so grateful, man. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Absolutely, I appreciate it, and there's so much to share. We got so much more to talk about.
Yes, I can't wait, man. All right, and we are out.